Why Women Hated John Wayne. January 1947, 2 in the morning. A man walks through the front door of his own house, and a gun goes off in the dark. The bullet passes close enough to his ear that he feels it before he hears it. The person holding the gun is his wife. The man, the following morning, drives to the set and goes back to work. His name is John Wayne. Not a character in a movie, not a scene from a script. This happened in real life, in a house in Los Angeles, and it is not even the strangest thing about him. For an entire decade, through the 1960s and into the 1970s, millions of American women looked at the most famous face in Hollywood and felt something very specific. Not indifference, not boredom, something sharp and personal. The kind of feeling you get when you realize the thing you've been told is normal has been quietly making your life smaller for years. They didn't hate a bad man. They hated what a good man, a celebrated man, a beloved man, chose to represent without ever questioning it for a single day of his life. And here's the thing that almost no one talks about. John Wayne was trapped too. He just didn't know it. His real name was Marion Robert Morrison, born May 26, 1907, in Winterset, Iowa. In 1930, a studio executive looked at a 22-year-old kid from the Midwest and said that name would never sell tickets. John Wayne was invented in an afternoon. Marion Morrison disappeared and never came back. And the question that sits underneath everything else in this story is a simple one. When you bury a man to create a symbol, where does the man go? The answer isn't on any movie screen. It's in 3 houses, 3 marriages, 3 women from 3 different countries who each walked into a life with John Wayne believing in something, and each walked out, or were left behind, changed in ways that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with a blueprint that was drawn long before any of them arrived. This is that story. The house Marion grew up in, Winterset, Iowa, 1907. The Morrison house has 2 adults and a child named Marion, who is learning very early how to read a room. Clyde Morrison, his father, is a pharmacist, good-natured, generous, not particularly ambitious, and in poor health. Chronic asthma that will eventually cost him his business, his savings, and his sense of standing in the family. He is the kind of man who loses things not through cruelty or laziness, but through the slow, grinding pressure of circumstances he cannot control. He declares bankruptcy in 1913. The family moves, then moves again, and again. 8 times in 5 years across the dry scrubland of Southern California, always chasing better air for Clyde's lungs, never quite finding it. Molly Morrison, his mother, is something else entirely. Sharp, ambitious, and constitutionally unable to hide her frustration with a husband she considers to have failed her in the particular way that ambitious people find most unforgivable. Not dramatically, not through one catastrophic act, but through the steady accumulation of not being enough. She lets him know this. The arguments in the Morrison house are frequent, and they are not quiet. Marion doesn't sleep well. He runs away from home more than once when the fighting gets too loud. He has no close friends because the family moves too often for friendships to take root. His name, Marion, which the other boys at school find hilarious, becomes another thing to survive. His best friend is a large Airedale dog. The firemen at the station on his paper route start calling the dog Duke, and the boy, Little Duke. And something shifts in Marion when he hears that name. It sounds stronger. It sounds safer. What a child learns in a house like that is not written down anywhere. It arrives through observation, through dinner table silences, through the particular way his mother's voice changes when she speaks to his father about money. What Marion Morrison learned watching Clyde and Molly is a lesson with 2 parts. First, a man who cannot control his circumstances will be diminished by the people closest to him. Second, the only way to avoid being Clyde is to become something harder, something that doesn't bend, something that doesn't need to be forgiven for failing, because it never fails in the first place. That lesson will not leave him, not when he gets to Hollywood, not when he gets famous, not when he gets married. It will follow him into every room he ever enters for the rest of his life, shaping what he asks of himself and, without his ever quite realizing it, what he demands from others. In 1925, Marion Morrison gets a football scholarship to the University of Southern California. In 1926, a body surfing accident destroys his shoulder and ends the scholarship. He is broke, without a degree, without a plan, and a film director named John Ford has just noticed him hauling furniture around a movie set and decided he is interesting. Ford becomes the second most important relationship of Wayne's life. He gives Wayne work, then roles, then eventually stardom. He also spends 40 years mocking Wayne in front of full film crews, calling him graceless, talentless, incompetent. And Wayne never leaves, never pushes back, never once stands up in front of those crews and says, "Enough." By the time Wayne is the biggest box office star in the world, he is still absorbing Ford's contempt in silence. A man raised in the Morrison house knows this dynamic. You do not challenge the person who holds power over you. You prove you are worthy of their approval. You work harder, stay quieter, endure more. And somewhere in that dynamic, in that specific combination of hunger for approval and refusal to show weakness, is the man who will walk into 3 marriages and never understand why each one breaks apart in the same way. But before the marriages, something has to happen first. A movie, a camera angle, and a moment from which there is no return. Stagecoach, 1939. The last day Marion existed. From 1930 to 1938, John Wayne makes approximately 70 films. Low-budget westerns, second-tier studios, small theaters in small towns. He is a working actor, reliable, professional, completely forgettable to the culture at large. His income is enough to live on. His fame is essentially zero. In 1939, John Ford gives him the role of the Ringo Kid in Stagecoach. The film is nominated for 7 Academy Awards. It is a phenomenon at the box office. And in one specific shot, Ford's camera moving slowly toward Wayne's face at an angle Ford had calculated with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was manufacturing, something happens that goes beyond the screen. There are moments in history when an image captures something a society desperately needs but hasn't yet found words for. America in 1939 is a country coming out of the Great Depression and moving toward a war it doesn't fully want to acknowledge yet. It is a country that needs to believe in a specific kind of man, certain without being arrogant, strong without being cruel, someone who knows right from wrong without needing anyone to explain it to him, and who acts on that knowledge without hesitation or regret. Ford's camera found that man in Wayne's face, and from that afternoon forward, John Wayne was not an actor anymore. He was a product, a very specific product, with very specific specifications. And any deviation from those specifications would be punished by the only authority Hollywood respects, the box office. Between 1939 and 1976, Wayne appears in 179 film and television productions. He is the #1 box office draw in America for 3 decades, not consecutively, but repeatedly, returning to the top of those lists in a way that no other actor of his era manages. Almost every character he plays shares the same essential trait. He knows what's right without being told. He does not change his mind, and he does not ask for anyone's permission. That is the product. and the product is about to walk directly into the living rooms of 60 million American families, week after week, year after year, showing an entire generation what a man is supposed to look like, and, by implication, what a woman is supposed to accept. The world in which that product makes perfect sense is about to end. And the collision between John Wayne and the world that replaces it is going to be so loud, so specific, and so visible that it will take historians decades to fully describe what happened. On screen, when the same film has two completely different meanings. There is a structure that repeats itself in Wayne's films so consistently that you can describe it in a single sentence. A woman appears who is strong, opinionated, and unwilling to be managed. The Wayne character encounters her. There's conflict. She learns she was wrong. The film ends when she accepts him. Not once, not 5 times, dozens of times across 2 decades in films that collectively made hundreds of millions of dollars and were watched by virtually every American family that owned a television set. The Quiet Man, 1952. Wayne plays Sean Thornton, an Irish-American returning to his ancestral village, falling in love with Mary Kate Danaher, played by Maureen O'Hara. Mary Kate is a woman with opinions, a voice in her community, a sense of her own worth. She is, in the language of the film, difficult. The climax of the movie involves Sean dragging Mary Kate across several miles of Irish countryside, through mud and pastures and streams, in front of the entire village, while the villagers line up along the route and cheer. The film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and won 2, including Best Director for Ford. Every review of the film from its release year describes the dragging scene as romantic or comedic. No one uses any other word. McClintock, 1963. Wayne plays George Washington McClintock, a cattle baron dealing with a wife, again played by Maureen O'Hara, who has returned to town with opinions about how things should be run. The film is a Christmas release, a Western comedy, family entertainment. It takes in $4.5 million in its opening week. The final scene, which becomes the most discussed scene in Hollywood history in the context of women's rights, involves Wayne chasing his wife through the center of town while she is dressed for bed. When he catches her, in front of the assembled townspeople, he forces her face down across his knee and uses a small coal shovel to s*** her publicly. The crowd in the film laughs. The audience in the theater laughs. That scene plays on television throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s without significant public controversy. It is family viewing. It is what Saturday afternoon looks like in a million American living rooms. Here is what else 1963 looks like. Betty Friedan publishes The Feminine Mystique. The central argument of the book is straightforward and devastating. Millions of American women are living in beautiful houses, married to decent men, raising healthy children, and experiencing a nameless suffocation that nobody in their lives will acknowledge as real. Friedan calls it the problem that has no name, and spends 400 pages naming it. The book sells 3 million copies in 3 years. It is later identified as one of the most influential nonfiction works of the 20th century. Put those 2 things next to each other, McClintock and The Feminine Mystique. Released in the same year, in the same country, addressing the same subject from opposite sides of a line that in 1963 does not yet have a name, but is already determining the shape of millions of lives. One of them tells American men that if your wife steps out of line in public, the appropriate response is public humiliation, and the appropriate tool is whatever happens to be in your hand. The other tells American women that the thing they have been feeling for 20 years is not weakness or ingratitude. It has a name, and it has a cause. If you grew up in America in the 1950s and 1960s and watched The Quiet Man in a movie theater and thought the dragging scene was funny, that does not make you a bad person. It makes you someone who was living inside a set of assumptions so thoroughly embedded in the culture that they were invisible. The way the air you breathe is invisible. The point is not guilt. The point is what happens when the air starts to change. Maureen O'Hara, for her part, spoke well of Wayne for the rest of her life. She described him as courteous, professional, genuinely careful about her safety during physical scenes. Katharine Hepburn, who worked with him in 1975, said he was considerably easier to deal with than his image suggested. These testimonies are real. They belong in this story, because the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story is not that John Wayne was a villain. It is that he was a decent man, operating inside a framework he had never once been required to examine. And that framework, projected onto 60 million screens every week, was doing damage he was completely unaware of. That is, in some ways, the most unsettling version of the story. Not the monster you can point at, the architecture you cannot see because you were built inside it. 3 marriages, 1 blueprint, 3 times broken. 3 women, 3 countries, 3 languages. 1 pattern so consistent it stops looking like coincidence long before you reach the end of it. Josephine Saenz was the daughter of a prominent Spanish-American family in Los Angeles, devoutly Catholic, socially connected in ways that Wayne, in the early 1930s, was emphatically not. Her father did not consider a B-movie actor a suitable match for his daughter, and made this view clearly known. Wayne and Josephine dated for 7 years while he built enough of a reputation to satisfy the family's standards. They married in 1933. They had 4 children, Michael, Tony, Patrick, and Melinda, in the years that followed. Josephine wanted what the marriage had seemed to promise: a family man, a present husband, a life built around the home and the children. What she got was a man who worked 16-hour days and spent his weekends on director John Ford's yacht, the Arroner, drinking and playing cards and existing in a world that had no room for wives or domesticity. The years of the marriage passed with Wayne increasingly absent, not through cruelty, but through the specific negligence of a man who has decided that his work is the most important thing in the world, and that a good home will run itself if you give it enough money. The marriage effectively ended years before the legal divorce, on December 25, 1945. Josephine Saenz did not give interviews after the divorce. She did not write a memoir. She did not make public statements of any kind about her marriage to the most famous actor in America. She lived for 34 more years after the divorce and never remarried. There are stories where the silence tells you more than any testimony could. Wayne met Esperanza Bauer, known to everyone as Chata, in Mexico City in 1941, while he was still married to Josephine. She was a Mexican actress, vivid and strong-willed, with a personality that matched his in intensity and temperament. They married in January 1946, 3 weeks after the divorce from Josephine was finalized. Wayne described the union himself, years later, with a precision that was almost scientific. It was, he said, like shaking 2 volatile chemicals in the same jar. What he meant, and what the next 7 years confirmed, was that Chata was not Josephine. She was not quiet. She was not absent in the way he was absent. She had opinions about his work and his time and his attention, and she expressed those opinions directly and sometimes catastrophically. She was also, as the marriage deteriorated, drinking heavily. So was he. The night of January 1947, after the cast party for the completion of Angel and the Bad Man, Wayne came home very late. Chata was waiting, drunk and furious, convinced, with or without justification, that something had developed between Wayne and his 22-year-old co-star Gail Russell during the filming. When Wayne walked through the front door, she fired. The bullet passed close to his ear in the dark hallway. The following morning, she was on her knees, sober and devastated, asking him to forgive her. He did. The cycle, reconciliation, sobriety, relapse, crisis, repeated itself for 6 more years. The divorce proceedings in 1953 were front-page entertainment news for weeks. Both parties accused the other of drinking, violence, and infidelity. The name Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., heir to the hotel empire, appeared in the legal documents as a man with whom Chadha had been involved while he was a guest in their home. The details were ugly and very public, and Wayne expressed afterwards that the publicity was among the things he regretted most about the entire episode. The divorce was finalized on November 1st, 1954. On the same day, the same calendar day, not the day after, not the following week, Wayne flew to Hawaii and married Pilar Payete. He did not wait. He had met Pilar 2 years earlier, in 1952, during a scouting trip to Peru for a potential film project. She was the daughter of a Peruvian senator, 22 years younger than Wayne, and at the time he met her, he was still legally married to Chadha. After their marriage, at Wayne's request, Pilar gave up her own acting career to stay home and raise their 3 children, Aisa, John Ethan, and Marisa. By 1973, the marriage had effectively ended, though they never divorced. Wayne died in 1979, with Pilar still legally his wife. She wrote about him in her memoir, with the kind of controlled honesty that takes years to achieve, and one line in particular carries the weight of everything. He wanted a traditional wife, she wrote, but he forgot that a traditional husband also has to come home. 3 women from 3 different cultures, each chosen, consciously or not, from backgrounds Wayne associated with traditional values, with femininity that had not been complicated by the arguments he saw developing around him in American life. 3 times the same hope. 3 times the same disappearance. 3 times the same result. Here is what that pattern looks like from the outside. Wayne spent his entire adult life looking for a woman who could live comfortably with John Wayne. The question he never asked, and may never have had the vocabulary to ask, was, which woman could live comfortably with Marion? Because John Wayne was a performance, sustained over decades with extraordinary discipline. Marion Morrison was the person underneath it. And Marion Morrison, buried in 1930 by a studio executive who needed a better name, had never been given the chance to figure out what kind of life he actually wanted. Chadha Bauer died on March 10, 1961. Heart attack, Mexico City. She was 41 years old, no children, no ongoing career, no significant assets. The historical record contains her name for one reason only. She was once married to John Wayne. She was 41 years old, and the marriage did not destroy Wayne. In the year she died, he was filming The Comancheros and preparing for The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He was 54 and at the height of his powers. The marriage did not destroy him. It destroyed her. The country changes, and he doesn't. To understand what happens next, you have to understand what America looks like between 1963 and 1972. 1963. The Feminine Mystique. 3 million copies in 3 years. 1966. The National Organization for Women is founded, the first major organization in American history dedicated specifically to advancing women's legal and civil rights. 1970. Tens of thousands of women marched through New York City in the Women's Strike for Equality. Their demands are specific: equal pay, legal publicly funded child care. These are not abstract philosophical positions. They are descriptions of what daily life looks like for millions of women who are paid less than men for the same work, who have no legal right to make decisions about their own bodies, and whose children have nowhere to go while they are at work, because the culture still believes the children are the mother's problem. July 1971. Gloria Steinem and more than 300 women found the National Women's Political Caucus in Washington, D.C. The same year, Ms. Magazine is launched. the first national magazine in America, owned, edited, and written by women for women, as a publication that treats its readers as adults with full inner lives. The first issue sells out within days. 1972. The Equal Rights Amendment, a proposed constitutional amendment stating that legal rights cannot be denied on the basis of sex, passes both houses of Congress. The amendment will ultimately fail to be ratified by enough states, but its passage through Congress represents the high point of legislative momentum for the women's movement. These are not background events. These are the context in which every John Wayne film shown on television during this period is being watched. These are the years in which the women sitting in living rooms across America are simultaneously reading Friedan, signing petitions, watching their daughters grow up in a country that is changing faster than any of them had imagined possible, and then turning on the television and watching McClintock for the third time that year. In May 1971, 2 months before the founding of the National Women's Political Caucus, John Wayne sits down for a long interview with Playboy magazine. He is 64 years old. He has been the #1 box office star in America more times than any actor in the country's history. He speaks without a filter and without apparent concern for how his words will land. In the interview, Wayne describes what he sees happening in America as the loud noise of irresponsible liberalism. He speaks of the country's founding values with a reverence that carries within it a clear implication. Those values are correct. They do not require revision, and the people arguing for revision are arguing for something he does not respect. He does not address women's rights specifically. He does not need to. The absence of any acknowledgement that women in 1971 might have legitimate grievances, the simple, complete, undisturbed absence of that acknowledgement, is itself a position. It is a specific kind of statement, not the statement of a man who has considered the argument and rejected it, the statement of a man who has not registered that there is an argument to consider, the statement of a man standing in a room while the walls are coming down and looking at the horizon. For the women who had spent years being told that their discomfort was ingratitude, that their ambitions were a kind of selfishness, that the arrangement of their lives was natural and permanent and not subject to appeal, the sight of the most famous man in American cinema sitting in complete tranquil certainty was not a neutral image. It was evidence. Living, celebrated, commercially successful evidence that the system they were fighting was not going to step aside because they asked nicely. You cannot fight a system. You can fight a face. In January 1974, the Harvard Lampoon, the student humor publication at Harvard University, which by 1974 is the intellectual center of a generation that has marched against Vietnam and read The Feminine Mystique and decided that John Wayne is a relic, invites Wayne to campus to receive the Brass Balls Award, a prize invented specifically to give them the opportunity to publicly mock him. Wayne arrives in a fake armored vehicle, sitting on top of it, waving, smiling. He knows exactly what this is. He is not going to give them the satisfaction of looking rattled. In the question and answer session that follows, he deflects every hostile question with the practiced ease of a man who has been performing confidence for 40 years. He is, by any measure, impressive. He does not flinch. He does not apologize. He gives them nothing they can use against him. And when the vehicle rolls back out of Harvard Yard, when the young students watch it go and laugh among themselves, not with him, but about him, there is something in that departure that cannot be argued away. A man performing for an audience that has already decided the performance is over. Not failing, not backing down, just utterly, completely alone in a room that has moved on. The Shootist, 1976. The only time Marion was on screen. There is a scene in The Shootist that runs less than 2 minutes and contains no dialogue worth quoting. It is, by technical measures, a minor scene in a film that critics received warmly, but that made no particular impression at the box office in 1976. The film is about J.B. Brooks, an aging gunfighter dying of cancer, who knows he has months left, and chooses to decide, on his own terms, how those months end. John Wayne plays Brooks. When the cameras were rolling, Wayne was in the middle of his own fight with cancer, his second. The director, Don Siegel, knew. The crew knew. No one said anything on set. They came in every morning and made the film. The scene is this. Brooks sits alone in front of a mirror in the early morning light of a boarding house bedroom. He looks at the man looking back at him, older than he expected, thinner. The face that sold 2 billion movie tickets over 4 decades, and behind it, visible if you know what you're looking for, something very quiet and very tired. Watch that scene again, knowing what you now know, not as a performance, as a moment. A man named Marion Robert Morrison from Winterset, Iowa, sitting in front of a mirror at the end of something and not performing for anyone. Because that is what illness does that fame cannot undo. It removes the requirements to be anyone other than who you actually are. The camera is still running, but Marion doesn't have to leave anymore. Wayne made no more films after The Shootist. He appeared publicly in April 1979 at the Academy Awards ceremony, visibly diminished, thinner than anyone in that room had seen him, but walking without assistance, standing straight, the last performance of a man who did not know any other way to exist in public. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted longer than any other that evening. The women of the 1970s who had looked at his face and felt fury, some of them stood too. Not because they had changed their minds about what he represented, not because the films had become less troubling, or the Playboy interview less revealing, or the marriages less instructive about the blueprint he carried everywhere he went, but because there is a difference between what a symbol represents and what a human being is in the last months of their life. And when a human being stands in front of you at the end of theirs, with everything stripped away except the effort of standing, the appropriate response to that effort is not political. It is human. He died on June 11, 1979, stomach cancer. 7 of his children were with him. He was 71 years old. Why women hated John Wayne. Here is the answer to the question in the title, as honestly as it can be put. Women did not hate John Wayne because he was a cruel man. The testimony of nearly everyone who worked with him personally suggests he was not. They did not hate him because he wanted women to be harmed. There is no credible evidence that he did. They hated him with the specific, focused, unignorable intensity of people who have finally found words for something they've been carrying for years, because he was the most beautiful and beloved and commercially successful proof available that the world they were trying to change was not embarrassed by itself. It was not in hiding. It was not ashamed. It was at the #1 spot at the box office. It was on television every Saturday afternoon. It was answering questions in Playboy with the calm certainty of a man who has never once been required to justify his assumptions to anyone. You cannot fight an abstraction. You can fight a face. His face was the most recognizable in America, and it was attached to a set of ideas about men and women that half the country was trying, with great difficulty and considerable personal cost, to dismantle. But here is the thing that almost never gets said, almost never gets asked. The system that told women they had to be the perfect wife, silent, accepting, present, grateful, without ambitions that exceeded the walls of their house, was the same system that told John Wayne he had to be John Wayne every minute of every day. Never wrong, never changing, never allowing Marion to surface because Marion was soft. And soft was failure. And failure was Clyde Morrison sitting in the kitchen while Molly's voice stripped the paint off the walls. Women fought their way out of their cage, They organized, they marched, they argued, they wrote, they founded magazines and caucuses and organizations, and they changed the law. It took decades, and it cost enormously, and they did it. Wayne did not get out of his. Not because he lacked courage. The man spent a lifetime proving he did not lack courage in any conventional sense. But because Marion Morrison had been buried in 1930 at the age of 22, and the hole was too deep. And John Wayne had been standing on top of it for so long that he'd forgotten there was anything down there. In 1980, the United States Congress posthumously awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. The medal was inscribed, John Wayne. Marion Morrison was not mentioned. If you grew up watching his films, if you sat in a theater or a living room and felt, at some point, that something about those images was complicated, leave a comment below. 60 years later, the conversation is still worth having.